Hi, this is Craig of Sulcata Grove, and today we're going to talk a little bit about some ground covers. Specifically, we're going to start talking about perennial peanut. Um, that's what this is that I'm standing in. We've had really good success with this in our yard, and I've seen it in some other places that have a lot of space that they don't want to deal with grass. And so, to start with, there's two major kinds of perennial peanut. There is an ornamental type like this, and then there's a forage type that's meant to be basically put out in cattle pastures, and it gets much taller. You're probably never going to find the taller part if you're like actually buying plugs or something. Nobody's going to sell that anywhere, but if you're out collecting it somewhere, you might want to make sure you're not getting the tall kind. I understand of the ornamental types, there are now several different cultivars that are out that are going to have some differences as well. This was really pushed back, it's probably been like 20 years now. The UF was pushing this as an alternative to lawns. Lawns in Florida have a lot of disadvantages. There's no real good reason to have a lawn in Florida. Florida's climate isn't really suited for most types of grasses that aren't going to require a lot of maintenance, watering and pesticide treatments and all kinds of other stuff. Whereas something like perennial peanut, it's a legume, so it's nitrogen fixing, so it doesn't need to be fertilized. Once it's established, it really doesn't need to be watered unless we're having an extreme drought, and even then, we didn't water any of this, and this is one of the driest years we've ever had. And there's really nothing as far as pests go. There's nothing that nothing yet that attacks perennial peanut. So it's really a great alternative. You have to mow this as tall as it gets. When you get a good rains, it might get a little bit taller, but it's never where you can't walk through it. So you never have to mow it. In fact, you don't want to mow it. We'll get into that a little bit later. But so it. Like I said, it was pushed by UF as an alternative to lawns several years ago. That's actually where this came from. I had a job. I worked at UF, and actually I took some of this stuff where gets near concrete, it'll creep out over the concrete, and I just took some cuttings of what was coming out over the concreted places, brought it to my house in Archer, planted it there, got it going there, took some of those plugs, moved it to my parents' house who lived in Gainesville. They grew it out. Once we moved down here, I got some plugs from my parents' house, and that's what all of this actually is grown from, one original plug from my parents' house in Gainesville. So this is whatever variety UF was growing on their campus at the time. But so you can see how deep this gets. It's I mean, it's what's that, 8 inches deep about. So it gets nice and thick. And for the most part, it will keep out weeds. Now, it will not outcompete weeds. You can't take a weedy field, place this in here, and have it take over and kill off the weeds. It won't do that. The way it keeps weeds down is it shades everything out. It makes a nice thick cover. Now, you'll see I have a few places here where here I've got some grass that's made its way up through. You'll get a few other types of weeds that if they can get started and poke their heads up through the top, you will get a few weeds, but it's very easy to keep it weeded. And then once you really get it weedless, it'll stay that way. New weeds really don't come through it very often, so it's really good for that. And now we got a spot over here where we're going to transplant a little bit of this, and so I'm just going to show you how we do a transplant. So I'm just going to cut out. Usually what I'll do is I'll take 2 strips. I'll cut about 1 foot wide. I used to use just a silky handsaw and cut but this thing makes a really thick root mat. But it's a shallow root mat. And cut 2 lines until I got the length that I want, usually about 6 or 8 feet. Roll it up like sod, and then move it to where I'm going to cut it into pieces and plant it. But I'm just going to do one small piece today, and I'll show you how we do it. So I'm going to start with, I don't use the handsaw anymore. I found that a reciprocating saw works really well. So I'm just going to cut a square out here, make sure I'm not where my irrigation lines are. So here's our plug. Did about a foot square, maybe a little less. And you can see it. It will fill this hole back in just a few weeks, especially if I add some water and mulch to it. Okay. So this is the spot we're going to put it down. Ideally, you want to have a place where it's just a blank slate. But there's some ways around this that we found perennial peanut grows really best if you've mulched the area first. So even if it's not fully weed free, if you put a thick layer of mulch on it, you can kill off the weeds that way. You can put down paper or cardboard. You can come through with the flamethrower or whatever you want to do to kill off the weeds. But so this is the spot I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to start with putting down a layer of mulch here. So let me grab some mulch. Okay, so we got a little mulch pile here. I'm just going to spread this out, and this is going to help to keep some of these weeds from getting in while this gets started. And peanut grows really good both through and on top of and under mulch. The mulch, you don't have to worry about the mulch keeping the peanut down. Okay, so I got down here back to the sand. I'm just going to dig out a little hole big enough to put this in. I'm going to drop it in. I'm going to take some of this sand, put it back over the top. Just kind of put that in. And I'll put my mulch back. And that's it. I'm going to water this really good today. And I'm going to try to water it every day for the next week or two. And that's going to really let this get a good start. And once it really gets a good start, it's going to start spread. Now you want to make sure you continue your mulch out around, because you don't want this to have to try to grow over sand or open dirt, because again, it's going to have to fight with the weeds more that way. And the mulch really just seems to make this stuff thrive. So you can expand your mulch out as you want to with growing this, and you'll have a nice thick patch of it. Water it good for the first, like I said, at least 2 weeks for sure, but maybe even for your first year of getting it established. Especially if you don't have a lot of good mulch on it, keep it really well watered. But if you do have it mulched, it doesn't take that much. So I mentioned earlier about mowing the peanut. I do have some areas of the yard where I have to mow the peanut because it's surrounded by the other grasses and things. It won't hurt the peanut for you to mow it. It'll come right back up just fine. The reason you don't want to mow it though is that you're taking away its ability to outcompete weeds. Because the reason it outcompetes weeds well is you have an 8-foot tall thick mat. 8 inches, thank you. Unless you're doing something wrong. Yeah, you're going to have an 8-inch thick canopy that's going to keep the light out, that's going to keep any other weeds from being able to kind of get established. Whereas if you mow it, and like I said, it'll come back, but then you're kind of giving your weeds a chance to come up through it more often. So it's up to you. Let me show you a spot where I do have peanut that I do mow regularly, and you'll kind of see the difference. Here's a space where we put peanut in several years ago. This is actually all peanut through here, but it also gets mowed. You can actually see I just mowed this strip yesterday, and I think I mowed this one low, and I mowed this one a little bit high, about 1 inch taller. So this has just been mowed, and you can see there's still plenty of peanut in here, but the grass is really coming in thick as well. So it kind of gives you a mixture, and if you don't mind that, that's fine. But you can see like on the edges where I can't really mow, it still gets tall, and which is kind of nice because it'll keep having some ability to push in. Even if I somehow killed this, it's going to grow back in. But to me, it just doesn't look as nice mowed as it does if you let it get nice and tall and thick. So, okay, so this is a patch that we did. It's been this year, hasn't it?
Last 2022.
Okay, it was the end of last year. We had this was all under weed cloth. We killed off the weeds. It came back in, we mulched the whole thing, and I put down probably about 12 to 16 plugs of the peanut in here. And then we actually neglected it for a long time, and the weeds came in and completely covered everything out. So then we had to come in, we pulled the weeds. I was going to cover it back up and start over, but Celeste said, no, we'll pull the weeds. So we went, and she pulled a lot of them, and our girls pulled a lot of them. Pulled out a lot of the weeds and cleared it out some, and now the peanut has really come back and taken over. And you can see we still, especially around the edges, we do have some areas where the weeds have kind of come in. So we'll go through and pull those weeds out or kill them off and give this room to fill into. But for the most part, though, this is really filled and complete. I can see got one weed here that's coming through. But there's not many. One bad patch here. But once this comes in, and you see too, this is also very, very shallow. This hasn't gotten thick yet. And again, once this gets thick, and this is 8 inches tall, it really is going to outcompete those weeds by shading them out, and they're not going to be able to get going. So.
And this is one of the septic drain fields on our property.
Yeah, the back half of this is part of our septic drain field, which we had a new one put in years ago, and so they came in and cleared everything out, so it was a blank slate. And what I came in and put on that blank slate was Sunshine Mimosa, which is another really nice ground cover. But the mimosa did nothing to outcompete the weeds. Mimosas, it's a great plant. Actually, there's some of it over here.
Yeah, it's actually native to here.
Yeah, it's native. The bees like it. So here's a little patch of the mimosa that's left over from it crept over from where we had it on the septic field. But you can see here, there's a lot of weeds that are still coming up through it. But you can also see the bees are having a great time, and they are loaded up with pollen from it. So there's no disadvantage to having the mimosa unless you really want something that's just going to completely outcompete weeds. It's a beautiful little plant. It's very vigorous. If you mow over it, it comes right back up. So yeah, I really like having the mimosa, and especially because the bees like it. So the mimosa is really nice, but the mimosa will not really do much to outcompete weeds. It's kind of a filler, and I'm working. I haven't really done much yet, but I'd like to try mixing some mimosa with some peanut. My thought is that the peanut will probably just completely choke it out, but we might try some, because it's also, the mimosa has a really nice flower, and the bees really like it. So mimosa is another really nice one. But anyway, that's Perennial Peanut, and it is a great ground cover, and I think you can buy plugs of it at like maybe Lowe's or Home Depot, or some other nurseries certainly have it. But
yeah, I think I've seen it at Sweet Bay Nursery, but there are other ones.
Yeah,
just
I'm sure
ask
you can
for a
find it.
turf
If you're in a different
replacement.
part of the state, I'm sure somebody's got it. It's not quite as popular or as available maybe as it was back when UF was really pushing it, because they did a lot of promotions for it and stuff, and so it's probably a little bit harder to find now, but you can find it, and you can do your entire, we've got 2 acres here, and the entire thing's going to be done with what started from one plug. So you don't need to have lots of it if you've got a little bit of patience, and you're going to want to wait till you have enough mulch to have it grow over too, because the mulch makes a big difference with the peanut. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time.